can't see anyone looking to join anymore. So we'll get started. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. Hopefully, yeah, you find this small webinar interesting and you have a bit of fun with the fun activity we have planned for the end. So what this is about today is just, I imagine that most of you will have started their PhD relatively recently or in the early stages of PhD. So it's just going to be about how to manage the workload, how to manage stress and, you know, plan, and also how to find funding and the grants that are offered by the British Society for Geomorphology in general. Next slide. Is this? Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so a few housekeeping points for the call. So if, in order to preserve everyone's bandwidth, if you can all keep your cameras off for now while we have all the talks and your microphones on mute, that would be great, just so that we don't have any background noise. Yeah, and just check that your, you know, that your username is professional. And then if you have any questions, if you can just type it in the chat. We'll have also a specific time designated for question and answer. So you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question like that, if you prefer. Also a reminder that we are recording this webinar just for people who can't attend due to time zones or other commitments. So hopefully this is okay. If not, just keep your cameras off and you shouldn't appear anywhere. So that should be fine. And yeah, have fun, ask questions. This is what it's about, to interact with other people in the field. So yeah, don't be shy and yeah, feel free to ask anything. So the plan for today is, well, we're doing some introductions just now. Sam is going to talk a bit more about the British Society for Geomorphology and the work that we do in the Postgraduate Forum as well. And then we're going to hand over to our two main speakers for tonight. So that's Madeline Han from Manchester University, and she's going to be talking about project management and stress management in the PhD. And then that's, she'll be talking us through it, and then there'll be a bit of time for questions after her talk. And then we'll move on to Rachel Smetley from the University of Liverpool, who will tell us about grant applications. And as well, there will be some time for questions at the end. And after that, we'll have a minute break, and then we can come back here at 6 for a Pictionary and some networking. So that's hopefully fun. And yeah, hopefully you've all brushed up on your drawing skills and you're ready to show off. Yeah, so I think that's it from me. I'll hand over to Sam. He'll tell us a bit more about the BSG.
Okay, thanks, Marina. So just a little bit about us before we get started, for those of you who maybe haven't come across the British Society for Geomorphology before. So running this seminar and our series of webinars that we've got on, that started in January and we'll have another one next month as well, are the current postgraduate forum of the British Society of Geomorphology, chaired by Erin, and then there's a load of us from different universities around the UK who are doing PhDs in geomorphology. And this is just to advertise that we're always after new people to join us if you've got ideas, or if you've got ideas or things about how you would like the society to be run and events that you would like to be put on for you by the committee, then please get in touch with us. You'll find more details on the website for the British Society of Geomorphology. So a bit more background, who are the BSG? The origins of the society kind of go back to the 1950s, and it was sort of formalised in 1960. So we were 40 years old in 2000, and in 2006, the British Geomorphological Research Group became formally the British Society for Geomorphology, and the goal of the society is to embrace the changing and broader nature of geomorphology, with a current membership of around 600 people, and there's a really good kind of strong postgraduate subsection to that as well. The benefits of joining the BSG, you'll find all the details about how to become a member on the website. It is a great way to stay in contact with the world of geomorphology, and this is both academic geomorphology and geomorphologists working in industry and in business. And if you come to the webinar next month, you'll find out a little bit more about that. It also gives free online access to the Society's journal, ESPL, Earth Surface Processes and Landforms, and there's regular electronic newsletters so you can stay in touch with what's going on in the world of geomorphology. As a postgrad as well, you also get reduced a reduced fee for the Windsor Postgraduate Workshop, which is a great residential, usually in December, and obviously for obvious reasons that didn't happen this year. So these webinars are trying to fill some of that gap that was left by the workshop. But that's a really great event and worth becoming part of the society for when things get back to normal. Other things include access to research funding, which Rachel, who's the grants officer for the society, will talk about in a little while. There's also some special awards which are awarded at the annual meeting every year, specifically for postgraduates. So the Bernie Smith Award is the annual award for best postgraduate talk and poster at the meeting, and the Dick Chorley Award is for best paper published as part of PhD research. And these come with a cash prize, but also the prestige of winning these awards. And so if you want to get in touch with us, one of the best ways is Twitter, or you can drop us an email. And there's plenty of stuff to get involved with. We're aiming to have more webinars like this in the future. We're aiming to strengthen the ties between the postgraduate body and the geomorphology and industry, the professional geomorphology groups. We're also launching some exciting EDI initiatives with the wider society as well. So there's lots going on and lots to stay in touch with. So yeah, Twitter is a great way to engage with us and the wider society as well. So that's enough intro. We're now going to move on to our first speaker, who is Madeline Han from the University of Manchester. And Maddie is a final year PhD student there, and she will be sharing with us some of her experiences of her PhD and managing the kind of the trials and tribulations and workload which comes along with doing a complicated research project. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen. And Maddie, I will hand over to you whenever you're ready.
Great, thanks very much, Sam. Can you hear me fine?
Yeah.
I'll take that as yes, great, thanks. Yes, so hello, as Sam said, I'm called Madeline and I'm at the University of Manchester at the moment in the Department of Geography. I originally did my undergraduate in geology at Imperial College in London, and before that I lived on the Yorkshire coast. So I'm now in my 4th year of my PhD. I got about a 4-month extension due to COVID, and I'm hoping to submit next month, which is exciting. So I'm, in general, I've really enjoyed the experience. Doing a PhD is a really fantastic thing to get to do, and I'm really excited that you're all doing one. And it'll be great to hear later about what you guys are doing. But there are a lot of very unique challenges associated with the whole process. It is quite a strange process. Yeah, and it can be very difficult at times, and it can be quite stressful. So I'm going to talk a bit about things that I've found have helped to cope with like the workload and the stress. And I've also asked lots of my friends who've done PhDs or are doing PhDs at the moment, what they found helpful as well, and then talk about project management as well. So I'll start sharing my screen and show you my slides, if I can find them. There we go. Great, so hopefully you can see that fine. I will start off with some, and I've put some photographs of Antarctica just as a sort of calming. I couldn't think of any, photos or background that you actually needed to see, so I've just put some calming influences of some nice scenery, which we all enjoy as geomorphologists. So I think my first bit of advice for sort of coping with a PhD and the kind of pressure that comes with it is just to make sure that if you're having difficulty with something, that this could be really small, it could just be a little problem that you're trying to solve, or it could be something that feels really overwhelming and scary. Asking for help and finding ways to help yourself sooner rather than later is just so helpful, and not letting things drag out and get bigger and bigger, because doing a PhD is really hard. You've been selected to do a PhD and you've applied to do a PhD and been successful because you're probably really hardworking, you're probably very talented at what you're trying to do, you've worked really hard at school and at university and in whatever work you might have done before this to get to this point. So it is a real challenge, but it doesn't have to be horrible, it doesn't have to be unpleasant. So if there's something that is feeling not right or you're really struggling with, then you don't have to sort of suffer through anything just to prove that you're good enough to be a PhD student or you're working long enough hours. There's always people who will be either employed to directly help you or will be very happy to help you and support you. So I think that's really important, doing things sooner rather than later. And I guess that also speaks to the fact that we are on a timeline all the time, which is a big source of the pressure and the stress. So the sooner you can get things sorted out, the longer you'll have to deal with it. And as well, as PhD students, we love to have a good complain over a cup of coffee at lunchtime or at any time really. But there are lots of really amazing parts of a PhD that you can really allow yourself to embrace. The flexibility that you get doing a PhD just in your entire, all of your life during your PhD, you have incredible flexibility to manage your own time, to work whenever you want to, even though there is a lot of work to do. You can use that to your advantage and really enjoy it while you can. It might be difficult to do right now, but don't be afraid to enjoy it and enjoy the fact that nobody's going to check if you're off for a long walk at lunchtime, or if you finish a couple of hours early or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that. Another big bit of advice that I think really helps to cope with all different kinds of stress and different pressures of the PhD is finding all your different networks. When you first start a PhD, it's really overwhelming sometimes when, in your first few months, you're thrown into a new institution, whether you've just come from another university or you're coming back from work or in any scenario, it's overwhelming to be thrown into a big system like a university. So, finding where you can fit in and the people who can help you within that big system is really important. And the different groups of people or the different individuals that can help you with different things and support you with different things. A friend is very different to a supervisor, which is very different to a mentor. So you can kind of figure out who can help you with what. And I'll talk more about supervisors in a second. So that's always really great. And I think research groups and lab groups are something that you might be a bit tentative to take part in at first. I definitely was in my first year. I sort of sat in my research groups and didn't really say anything and didn't feel like I had anything to contribute. But actually now being at the other end of the spectrum, I can see how excited research groups are when a new PhD student joins, and they really want you to get involved and they want to support you, and you're part of the same group because you're all interested in the same things. So that's definitely a network that you should enjoy and get to know people in that research group if you can. And universities provide so much as part of your experience, so don't be afraid to go and use the careers service, they often have free counselling services, things like that, and figuring out what's available almost before you need them, before you need these services, is great. So then you know where to turn when you want information. So supervisors are the relationship that you have with your supervisors is a very interesting relationship. They're a huge part of your PhD. It's totally undeniable. And they are most likely going to be your greatest ally and your biggest support and your biggest champion throughout all of this. So your relationship with them is really important. On the flip side of that, sometimes people's relationships with their supervisors don't really work, and there's no point in shying away from that. And that's one of the hardest things that can happen in a PhD. And in my experience, it's when PhDs kind of go wrong or get to the end and they've not gone very well, or there's difficulties at the end, it's because there's been a difficult supervisor PhD student relationship all the way through. So if in any way you feel like things are not working, or you're not communicating very well, or you feel like you're being ignored, or you feel like they're too in your face and they're always looking at your work, then find a way whether you can say that to them and talk directly to them about it, or something that a lot of people say they've done and can be really helpful is finding a kind of alternative unofficial supervisor that you can have slightly different conversations with. That might be someone in your research group, for example, who can be a mentor to you and guide you through some research principles, and perhaps show you in extreme circumstances how you can try and get around or change supervisor in a really extreme circumstance. This doesn't happen to very many people, by the way. I'm definitely talking about extreme circumstances, but it does happen. So I think there's absolutely nothing wrong in asking about that before things happen. So saying, okay, if I can't talk to my supervisor about something, who can I talk to? Because departments can often feel like very close, tight-knit environments, and you feel like, oh, I don't want to say something about one person and then they'll know. But there are systems in place to help you with this kind of thing. So don't be afraid to ask people. And just in yourself, the thing with a PhD is it is so personal, and I think that's what makes it really quite difficult compared to other kinds of work, because it is often so tied into you as a person, or it can really feel like that because you're the driving force behind it, and it's you that it matters to at the end of the day. So it can feel very all-consuming and overwhelming. So if you are feeling very stressed, or feeling like you're struggling to cope with the workload or some aspects of the PhD, I'd really encourage you to try and write things down, really think about what it is that is causing this, whether it's just this big nebulous feeling, or if you can figure out, is it that you feel like you're not going to meet your deadlines, or is it that you feel like you're not good enough when that's just not the case because you've been asked to do this because you are good enough? Is it one thing that I found difficult was that if you have a personal life pressure coming from a different angle, it's difficult to separate that from your PhD because you're managing it all yourself. Yeah, so if you can identify what's wrong, then you can begin to take a bit of control where you can, and again, ask for help and use all the systems that you've already found out about that can support you. And definitely take the holiday and take the breaks that you are meant to have. It will help you in the long run, having had some time just to reset and come back to things fresh. It definitely will. There are no medals for working stupid hours. You don't have to do that to get a PhD. You can enjoy it and not have to do that all the time. So shifting a little bit to project management, which is, I've noticed that I have spoken for too long, but I'll go on for maybe 3 more minutes if that's okay, Sam.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great. So project management is a huge part of the project and can help you to mitigate a lot of the stress or a lot of the stress that can come with the PhD. So you are going to make, during your PhD, you're going to make hundreds of plans. I've made so many plans of like, this is what I'm going to do, this is how long it's going to take me. And within a week or 2 weeks or a month, that plan is completely out the window and you write another plan and another plan. But it's important to iterate through these things, and it is worth doing. Everything will take longer than you think, especially writing. Budget longer than you think. And if you feel like your work is becoming, you know, if you're looking at your long term, you know, 2 years ahead or 1 year ahead, and you feel like it's going to take too long, then tell your supervisors and see if you can cut out an aspect of your project or something like that, or change something. Because you do have a limited amount of time and everybody's aware of that. So there's no point just blindly going towards the end and not saying anything if you think it's going to take too long. And yeah, be very honest with yourself and with your supervisors about that, because it is difficult to manage such a large project for 3 years or 4 years. It's incredibly difficult. Do your research first and your admin later. You will always get your marking done, or your, you know, things that you have to do, you will get done later. But if you can get up and in your day start off with your research, I find that really helps, just to, before you check your emails and things. I don't check my emails until lunchtime, so that I'm not thinking about lots of different other jobs. You know, that'll vary, like, but in the writing stage, I'm not getting very many emails. So that can help to kind of organize and compartmentalize your day like that. Yeah, I think you can see the rest of those. I'll talk for 1 minute about the very end of the PhD process, which might seem really far off for you right now. But understanding what happens at the end, like it does have to end at some point, sadly, can really help you visualize everything and really think it through. So, you know, understanding how you submit a PhD and how long that takes to do and what your real deadlines are, especially in this time when we're getting, you know, everyone seems to have different extensions and different kinds of extensions. Figure out what your real deadlines are and what your personal deadlines are. You know, if you're going to run out of funding and you need to have funding to survive, which everybody does in some form, then make sure you're working to the timeline that you need to work to, because it's your life, not anybody else's. Yeah, and what else? It's totally okay for you to ask your supervisors about jobs and careers, like after PhD. That's a big part of their job, and their concern is to help you progress forwards, and they're going to be a big part of your, you know, if you stay in a research career, they're going to be a big part of your career and giving you references beyond that. So they should be expecting you to talk about it, and they should talk about it with you. They're a really great resource to ask about jobs and things like that. Yeah, and do what you need to do, not what you think you need to do. You know, you can trust your gut instinct. Yeah, I've spoken for way too long, I'm sorry. This is my final slide of just some generic advice that I've picked up through the years and have sort of remembered and kept with me, that a day of your PhD work now is worth weeks or a month when you're employed. So if you run over your time and then you're trying to do it at the same time as a job, which a lot of people end up doing, yeah, a day can turn into a week of time allocation, if that makes sense. So really make the use of your time now. Yeah, get your research done. Don't get too distracted by lots of other things. Definitely take advantage of other opportunities that you can do, like joining something like the BSG Postgraduate Committee or doing other volunteer work, because in some cases that's what will get you the next job. I've seen that in lots of cases, that the experience people have had outside of their core PhD is what makes them stand out. But do it in a strategic, considered way, and you don't have to say yes to everything. You can pick 1 or 2 extra things and do them really well alongside your PhD and really enjoy them. Yeah, and I think I'll stop there. If that's okay. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Maddie. That was really good. And I actually forgot to say before Maddie started talking that she was the chair of the BSG Postgraduate Forum before Erin was. So it's really nice to have her back to share her wisdom with us. So we've got a few minutes now for some questions. If anyone would like to ask Maddie anything, feel free to type it in the chat. So if there's any questions, please do ask them now. Just to get us started, I've got a question, Maddie.
Okay.
And obviously, you spoke quite a lot about building networks and things like that. What might you advise at the moment? Because obviously everyone's working from home. It can be really difficult for new PhD students to find networks and people to support them. So how would you say would be a good way of going about that at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of, yeah, as I was writing that, I was thinking, God, it is just harder than ever right now. You know, you might not even have met your PhD supervisor in person at this point. I think that the two things that I'll say about that, I think finding a mentor is really, really useful. And a good way that you can do this is by figuring out what your niche is, like what your kind of personal brand as a researcher is. Like, are you an ecologist? Are you a hydrologist? Are you a pure fluvial geomorphologist? That sort of thing. And finding there are so many what do you call them, associations and societies like the BSG, but even more specific for lots of different things. And lots of them either have mentorship programs, or you can email them and say, I'm looking for someone to mentor me and support me in this specific career. And a lot of them are very, very open to people doing that. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there professionally. From that point of view, it's definitely something that I've done, and it's quite scary to say, spend some time on me. But I guess while people are willing to have, say every 3 months you could have a scheduled call with someone, that could be really helpful for you in the long term, especially looking for jobs in the future. And then I think I'll just reiterate how useful and how great research groups can be. And even if you've not really been able to fully engage with your research group before things getting locked down and meet them personally, they will be really excited to talk to you. And perhaps you could arrange, it's quite difficult when you're in big groups, isn't it? Or when you're in groups of like 10 people on a Zoom call, it's quite difficult to actually talk to people. So if you can ask them, if people in your research group that you maybe don't know that well yet, that aren't your supervisors, if they want to have like a 20-minute Zoom call with you, just to get to know them and get to know their research, I'm sure they'd love that, because they're all isolated too. So yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, great, thanks. That's really good advice. And one quick question in the chat from Chrissa as well. What would be the one thing that you would tell your first year self?
Yeah, that I'm not really stupid, and that my work is good enough, and that the work I did then I have now used in my thesis, and it wasn't terrible. I think it's safe to say that it's relatively common for PhD students to feel very what's the word, to feel like you're not good enough, or that you are somehow, the kind of imposter syndrome feeling in a way, but not feeling overly self-confident in the research you're producing. And that is because you're constantly surrounded by people doing incredible research, and very, very clever people who are all striving to find out new things all the time. So it's very easy to feel like you've got no clue, and you've probably, especially in a discipline like geomorphology that is very interdisciplinary, you might have done an archaeology undergraduate degree, or you might have been working as a hydrologist for the last 10 years, and then you've come into a geology, earth science, geography department, and suddenly you're surrounded by all these people who know everything about what you're trying to study or what they're studying, and it's very easy to feel like that makes you stupid and feel like negative about yourself. But it's just part of the learning process. You know, how could you possibly be an expert in these things? I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen, having just written my literature review, which is now 15,000 words long, which I didn't think I could ever write. That was what I thought I could never achieve. Yeah, so just remembering that you can do it and you are good enough to do it, because you wouldn't be there if you weren't.
Brilliant, thanks. That's some really good messages and great advice for everyone. And thanks again, Maddie, for talking to us today. It's been really good having you. So next, I'll pass over to Marina to introduce Rachel, our next speaker.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks, Maddie. That was really, really good. So next up, we have with us Rachel Smetley from the University of Liverpool, and she'll be talking a bit about the how to apply for grants and about the BSG grants as well. So over to you, Rachel. You can, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I guess I'm a little bit the other side of the PhD. I'm a lecturer in University of Liverpool, and I am the grants officer for the BSG Research Committee, which means that I'm the person who does all the spreadsheet shuffling, collates everything, and basically communicates it back to you guys. So I like to call myself the grants fairy twice a year, which is quite nice. And that was really interesting talk. Thank you, Maddie. It was really interesting having now sat on the other side of, I have 2 PhD students myself. I do remember what it was like to be a PhD student, but it just, it's really interesting to see what it's like these days. And from this sort of perspective, I'd like to just say that we all really like it when we get new PhD students. And even if it's not my own PhD students, I like to have a chat and always happy to support people. So don't ever be afraid of asking other people in the department. Everyone's pretty friendly, and they just like to hear everybody's research. And the imposter syndrome never goes away. I'll just say that as well. Right, okay, let's talk about what I'm going to do. I'm supposed to be sharing my screen on screen too. You won't think I've been teaching all year like this, would you? Here we go. Oh, I can't see anyone. There we go. Right, so hopefully you can see that, yeah? Okay. Quick,
Not
cool.
yet.
Oh, yeah. Or did I? I didn't click on there. There we go.
Yeah,
it's because in Zoom it has a thing where you have to click share, isn't it? Right. Let's get going. So yes, research funding. I think some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today will be quite interesting in terms of maybe not what you expected, but you'll see what I mean when we get further down the sort of talk. Right. I just wanted to point out, this is my natural habitat. I'm a lab person, so I do luminescence dating, and I also do a bit of geomorphology occasionally, mostly in Patagonia. But just in case you needed to have something to link my name to, if you ever needed to remember me in the future, I spend a lot of time in the dark. So today, what we're going to do, we're going to talk firstly about what the grants are in terms of postgraduates, but then I'm also going to encourage you to think about the future as well, because you should always have one eye on the future at the same point. Writing a good application, so I'm going to tell you the sort of things that we think about, or the actual sort of criteria that we work to when we're assessing everybody's applications in the big spreadsheet, and what the meaning of success is. I think that's basically, I'm just going to talk about the success rates over the last few rounds, because we've started recording them. And at this point, I'll remind you that the deadlines for all the grants, the sort of recurring grants, are twice a year. They come round, and you always forget they're coming round, but it's 1st of February and the 30th of September, so twice a year. So I've just used this is what it looks like on the website. So I just use this as like a thing to kind of talk about stuff. But in terms of the outreach stuff, I don't know much about the outreach in terms of postgraduate grants. That goes through the outreach committee. So if you have any questions about that, go to them. I know this year there was a special award, a special sort of round, so I think things are slightly different there. But what I'm going to focus on are the postgraduate conference attendance grants, the research grants, and then I'm going to get you to think about the early career research grants because they're really good in the future. Right, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about what grants we do, and because I think you can read a lot of that from the internet. I want to spend more time talking about writing your grant applications and the sort of things that we do in terms of when we're assessing them. Because I know certainly when I was applying for grants and stuff, you have no idea what it's like when you sit on a panel. And one of the things that I'd really like to do, having now spent the last 3 years doing this, is to kind of open that up and make it less black boxy, if you know what I mean. So you kind of understand a little bit more as to how that works. So in terms of the postgraduate conference attendance, it's divided as to whether the conference is within your own continent or outside of your continent. So £500 within the applicant's continent and £750 outside the applicant's continent. It can cover your registration, travel, accommodation, so all that sort of stuff. You can use it to part fund it in terms of, like, you might have £500 from us, or you might have £500 from another funding body, and then you can part fund it that way. It doesn't have to cover the whole thing. But the one key thing that I'll keep mentioning as we go through is that we don't usually pay for subsistence, so no food and things, because it is considered that you would usually pay for food yourself. That's just the BSG sort of regulation across all grants, pretty much. The one thing that you need to remember when you submit these, that well, actually, I've not known any students not do it, but it would probably be something I'd forget, is you need a supervisor reference. So don't forget to attach that before you submit. The postgraduate research grants are up to £1,000. They are quite flexible, so you can use them for field work, purchasing of data, items of equipment. And in fact, actually, under the purchasing of data, we now have it so that you can access things like dates. So anything that's not within the NERC facilities remit, so radiocarbon dating, cosmogenics, you can get all those within the NERC facilities stuff. But things like luminescence or lead-210, that sort of thing, you can't get through that sort of remit. And so one of the things that when I started, we used to have a line that said, we do not pay for dating, which I was like, well, that's not fair. Because yes, you can access some of them through NERC, but not all of them. So now that's kind of been opened up and is considered on a case-by-case basis. And hopefully soon we're supposed to be offering some free luminescence ages within a grant. So once that gets put up, you have to look out for that. This normally covers travel, accommodation, but again, not usually subsistence. And again, you need your supervisor reference to attach to that as well. So lots of sort of flexibility in that grant. And it's really interesting to see the sort of things that everybody applies for. Some people might want it for hiring a ski plane, or some people might want it for, I don't know, going and visiting a lab and using the facilities. It's really quite flexible. And the other thing that obviously you can't yet apply for, because you have to be a full member, it's kind of for postdocs and things like that. But one thing to just highlight at this point is the early career research grant. And I say this because there may be PhD students that sort of coming to the end of their PhDs, or something to always think about in the future. It's because it's really good. It's up to £5,000, and it supports the same sort of stuff as our research grants. But the key thing is it can really help kickstart your sort of independent research career. And I actually got one of these grants when I was, well, I can't even remember when it was, a couple of years ago, and used it to pump prime some of my future research stuff. And I think it was a really key stepping stone in sort of my career development. So really remember that when you get to that point. So write in a good application. I think the BSG do quite well in trying to open the black box of grant application writing. I've had my fair share of rejections through other channels, and you get no feedback. You have no idea what happened at panel. But I think the BSG is quite good in terms of trying to make that open to everybody so that they can understand how it works. And with that in mind, there is actually a document online explaining the criteria that you can go through and have a read through before you submit your grant. And I really recommend that you do that, because we do use these as indicators. You know, we have to, it's like a marking criteria when you're doing your marking for your exam scripts. You have to hit these points, otherwise you can't score highly in the different categories. So when we're assessing it, we have 3 categories: quality of science, value for money, and fit to the scheme, across all the schemes, yeah. And basically the quality of the science is the key indicator of, that's kind of like where most of the sort of weighting goes, if you see what I mean. And then the value for money and fit to the scheme is also really important, and is actually usually where you can differentiate between applications. It's mostly the fit to the scheme, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So obviously you've got to have really good quality science. So I've been through and just done a few little tips from what I remember when we sit and talk about it at panel, as to what's useful for the different grant applications under the different categories, because this is obviously how we think about it every time. We always have to think about it in these 3 categories, and we have to give it a score from 0 to 5. So, you know, you have different categories and you get different numbers. In terms of the conference grant, and this is actually the same for all of the grants, you really want to have, I love to see clear aims and objectives. A nice clear aim and objective, a good rationale. So don't be afraid of putting references in there. Don't be afraid of putting figures in there to explain what you're talking about. It's always nice to see some figures. Don't be afraid to put any, you know, preliminary data in or anything. So like if you're presenting something at a conference, put in your key findings in that bit to demonstrate why it's so important. And another thing that I think a lot of the applications, some of the applications will fall down on, is this question of what is the innovation, as in what is the new finding? Tell me why this is important, because we're interested, you know, quality of science is linked to whether it's incremental or not. So innovation is really important, and this is something that goes throughout your career. You know, REF is all about not having incremental research. It's all about being able to identify the innovation in your science. So, and we have a broad range of panel members. So we all sit with different expertise. So in terms of the rationale and stuff, there's usually somebody who knows what the broad area that you're researching in. So make sure you are, provide a good rationale for us who don't necessarily know, but also for those that do know as well. So just keep that in mind. Value for money, always list and justify all your costs, even if it's the really simple things. One of the key things is, especially with certain studentships, is to justify why you can't get this money from your research budget. So we get a lot of applications from a lot of different students. Some of you guys have like 10 times more research budget than I get allocated as a member of staff. And so you do have a lot of money. So it's really important to justify why that can't come from your research budget. And that might be because you've spent it all, because you had really big field budget. So you had to go to Patagonia and spend loads of money on that. That's fine. Just make sure and explain that that's the case. And there is space at this point to explain this sort of thing, because otherwise it's not considered particularly high value for money. Also feel comfortable to explain your situation and be specific. Everybody is different. Every PhD student is different. Every studentship is different. So please explain, you know, your situation, and then we can take that into account when we're looking at that criteria. And then the fit to the scheme. We want to know that you're presenting substantive results. That's kind of the sort of the key distinguisher between different conference grant applications. You're not just attending a conference because you feel like going. You're really going to present some really key new findings from your PhD, and it's really substantive results. Also, one of the things that differentiates applications, because obviously everybody's really, really good and they're presenting lots of really good research, is what you're going to do that will also enhance your profile, so contribute to your career development. Are you running postgraduate workshops? Are you going to attend certain key workshops that you're going to learn, I don't know, go and learn R or whatever at a workshop? So include those sort of things as well. And are you participating? Oh yeah, I've just mentioned that. Are you participating in any extra workshops? And with everything that you do in terms of applications, always be specific. Put the title of those sessions in. If there's people you're really keen to go and meet and network in, put those names in, like be specific, because it demonstrates that you've really thought about what you're doing. I spend most of my time telling my students that. Right, postgraduate research grant. Again, we want clear aims, objectives. What is the innovation rationale? Again, why can't this research come from your research budget? We get a lot of NERC students, for example, asking for money to pay for their core PhD research. And this is the bit that might surprise a lot of you. So in terms of the BSG and the research grants, it's all about funding research that extends the scale or the scope of your PhD. So the BSG itself won't fund research that is core to your PhD project, because it deems that that should have been thought about when you were writing your PhD project and should be covered by your funding and also by the university that you're working at. And that's a really key distinction when you're applying for these grants, is that point of extending the scale or the scope of your PhD. And as an example, that might include something like, say, you've been working on, I don't know, say you're a geomorphologist, and then all of a sudden you're really interested in, you want to learn how cosmogenic nuclides work, and you want to go and visit a lab. That would be extending the scope and scale of your PhD, and we'll fund that. Or say if you wanted to piggyback onto another expedition where you can take your skills, say you learned it in one area of the world, you can take those skills and apply it in another area of the world and contribute to their project. We can fund you joining that extra research that adds to your PhD and sort of extends your career development stuff. I'm probably talking really long, but this is a really important point. Another one we funded before is where we had a student who went and did a big field season in a very expensive part of the world. But when they were there, they couldn't access certain field sites because of difficulties with field site access. And so they wanted to then go back and sample again to extend the scale of their PhD, because they wouldn't have managed that in the first round. So we then funded them to go and do that, because they went and then dated older Marines that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to do in their PhD. So it's a really important point to make when you're applying, is to really demonstrate that you're extending the scale and the scope of the PhD. And and it's important to understand that bit about the fact that the core funding should come from your studentship and your university itself, which is not something that ever occurred to me before I sat on this grant panel. And actually I've seen it now when new members join, we all get very confused as to what that means. But hopefully that's made it a little bit clearer for everybody. And another thing that in terms of the fit into this scheme, pump prime in future activity. So whether that's outputs or career development. So even if you want to go and hang out with people in industry for a bit to make some new links there, that sort of stuff, that's extending the scope and the scale of your PhD. So in terms of outputs, I mean, publications, and don't be afraid to be specific about those publications, write titles and where you're going to submit and things like that. And then just to mention about the ECR grant for the future, if you do think about applying for this, one of the key things about this is in terms of the value for money criteria, which doesn't really come in with the other two, is about looking at match funding and in-kind contributions. So it's the idea that you can take £5,000 and turn it into a bigger sort of opportunity. It's not necessarily like essential, but it can help in terms of that sort of ranking. So if you can go and join a few £100,000 worth of expedition with your £5,000 and get huge research potential out of it, then that would be considered really positively. And when I talk about in-kind contributions, recently we've seen people putting things down like computers being provided as in-kind contributions from their universities. It's not that sort of thing. And then in the future, think about using this to pump prime large grant applications. And this is very specific. You need to write down where you're going to pump, what you're going to pump prime, whether it be paper or whatever. Just be specific about what you're going to pump prime, because then I can put a bigger tick in that box. So I think this is the last slide. these are just the tips that were on the top of my head when I was going through it. Hopefully I'm still not talking too long. So what costs must be reasonable. So the panel has very broad expertise. So assume that they know what you're doing and will pick up on any odd costings. So as an example, I've seen somebody submit a grant application and request a few £100 for some chemicals, which I know cost some £7 a bottle. So yeah, that was noted. And also, so like in terms of field stuff, I know some of my colleagues have picked up on when people have requested really large amounts to implement field equipment, and actually they know that it doesn't cost that much money. So just be reasonable, don't go crazy, because you know we're not going to fund you doing crazy things. Usually we don't include subsistence, as I mentioned, and if you do include a subsistence onto a grant, you don't be surprised if you are awarded, but then that's subtracted off your grant, or it's suggested that instead of paying for the subsistence, we'll pay for your accommodation, because it's you know we'll pay for the accommodation, but not it's. So say if you've suggested that you're going to request, I don't know, £1,000 from the BSG, and then you're going to spend £400 from a university budget to pay for your accommodation, we might say, well, actually, we're going to take the subsistence off there, but we'll basically use that contribution for your accommodation, but we're not explicitly paying for your subsistence. We would itemize that in the grant letter when we send it back. It would make more sense, but that's the kind of thing that we do. So it's not like there is a little bit of give and take in the process. It's not like we try and be helpful as much as possible. If you exceed the grant amount, explain where the remainder of the costs are going to come from, because otherwise we sit there and go, well, if we give them £1,000, like how are they going to get the extra £2,000? Like this isn't feasible. So mention that you're applying for other applications. You might use part of your research budget or whatever. It makes it seem like you've got other things, and to them it's more feasible. And then when we fund you, it's actually going to happen. So that sort of thing. Yeah, field assistance, so the ECR grants, but we don't do senior colleagues. That's on the website. We also don't do overhead salaries or things that can be considered to be core funding from institutions. Some people have requested money to pay for laptops or equipment in the field, which is considered to should be core funded by an institution, that sort of thing. And as I mentioned before, we can now apply for funds to cover dating, but only those that are not covered by the facilities panel. But all in all, it's kind of, we try and be quite flexible on these things. So the meaning of success. So recently, as you can probably well imagine, we've had very strange rounds of our grants. It makes my life easier because we have very few grant applications, but it means that the numbers were a bit dodgy in terms of application success rates. So I've gone to February 2020 when it's quite normal. So in terms of the success rates, they're quite high actually in terms of grant applications. So it's very positive. And these are the sorts of numbers that we get for each of the grants rounds when we're assessing them. They'll fluctuate quite a lot, and they'll fluctuate between February and September, but it's never really, there's no real pattern towards anything. And the one thing that to notice is that when it comes to the research grants, they're usually about equally weighted in terms of going to the postgraduates and also the full members. But usually the postgraduate research grant applications are better than the full members but yeah, they're usually very good in comparison. So you do very well out of that, and there's no sort of difference in terms of the success rates there. So you should be quite happy with that. And then in terms of all unsuccessful applications, I'll go through our feedback from the panel, and I'll provide feedback on how they can improve their application should they wish to resubmit. So one of the things that we want to do is to support everybody so that they can get that money the next time round. So if you just follow that feedback, you can resubmit and hopefully be successful the second time round. And everybody is welcome to contact me and ask for any more clarification should they wish from their applications. We're all happy to discuss it. And that is me done. It's very strange talking to just a blank screen. I hope somebody's still out there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. Some really good tips there. So yeah, thanks for sharing those with us. We have now some time for questions. Oh, Holly has a question. Yeah, Holly's asking, how long should the written justification for funding or value for money be?
So I don't think there's a specific word limit, unlike the first part of the form where you've got more sort of, where you've got to be more strict with what you're writing. But it's things like you just need to explain like why you've done stuff. So don't be too wordy, because it's note form, well, more like note form is, if you want to bullet point it, that's great, because we have lots to go through and it helps if it's, you know, nice and short. So don't go too wordy, people might not read it too easily. But like explain why you need the money. It's usually when students have spent all their research support budget, and they don't say that in the application. So they're saying, and because you always have to list what your studentship is. So if you say you're a NERC student and we go, oh, yeah, you've got like 14 grand to spend or whatever, and then you don't tell us that you spent all that money and that's why you need this research grant, then we can't do anything about it. So that's where the bit where it comes in terms of that bit. Is that the bit, is that what you meant, or is it more about how to justify the different bits, your different equipment and things like that?
I thought it might be easy just to pop up, but no, yeah, it was that bit really. So because I know that with the application forms, I've submitted a couple in my time, neither were successful. But yeah, so I know that the actual application is quite strict on the word limit, and I know that I don't want to give over like too much information in the justification for funding. So yeah, it was basically, if note form is appropriate, you know, with bullet points, then that's really, really helpful to hear, and yeah, that's good. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's fine by me. It's funny, I recognize people's names. It's good to apply for these things because it's a good networking thing. So I recognize Holly's name.
Quite a unique one is the last name. No, it's really helpful to hear. Actually, I had no idea actually before I applied for the postgraduate grant that you didn't fund PhD research. So it's really, really helpful to actually hear that today in advance of, you know, future applications. So thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, I didn't realize until literally I started reviewing them, and I think it's one of the sort of, it's not like it's hidden, it's all over the website, but people just don't, I think it's always assumed that that's what happens with, that's what these are for, but no, it's a real big difference. And you see, it's so, you're like, oh, this is a great project, but you need those two words, scale and scope, somewhere in it.
I think that was the thing, because I know it does say it really, really clearly that this grant is not used to fund PhD research, but I think my eyes just go to, oh, it's a postgraduate research grant. Okay, great, that's for my PhD research, you know. But yeah, so I guess that shows me I need to proofread more and I need to actually have a better attention to details.
Or that we don't necessarily are explicit enough.
It's definitely me. But anyway, thank you very much.
That's all right.
I have a quick question. So can you apply to, so if you apply for the conference grant, can you also apply for the other PGR grant as well? Or
I think you can, we've had it where someone's applied for both at the same time, but you have to choose which one you want to basically be evaluated for.
Okay. Good to know.
Yeah. There's so many nuances of the world of BSG grant.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure it's all in the website. I just haven't read properly. So.
It is, yeah. But I just usually email Marco, and I'm like, "What? I don't understand. What's the answer to this question?"
Do we have any more questions for Rachel? You can, yeah. If you want to unmute yourself and just say it, you can do that. If not, okay.
One of the things that I might add is that it is really interesting reading everybody's research, and it is really nice to be able to, we give out a lot of money every year. I don't know if I'm supposed to say how much it is, but it's probably more than you think. So it's really nice to be able to do that for everybody in the community. So if you ever get a chance to sit on this panel in the future, definitely have a go, because it's really nice to be that grants bearer twice a year and give people money.
All right, well, if that's there's no more questions, then thank you so much, Rachel, once again. This was super useful. Definitely we'll keep all those tips in mind when applying. And yeah, thank you so much to Madeline and Rachel for their really great talks. Now we're gonna go on to having a 5-minute break, I think, and then we'll be back for some Pictionary. So if you want to have some fun trying to draw some stuff, feel free to stay. And finally, if I can just ask everybody, we're going to put a feedback form on the chat. I think Erin is going to do that. So if you can fill that in, that would be great as well, so that we know how everything's gone, and if you have any suggestions for future topics, or yeah, what you thought, that would be really good if you could fill that in. Yeah, so I'll see you in, let's say, at 10 past. We can have you can go grab a cup of tea or toilet break, and we'll resume, and then we'll start with some Pictionary. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and see you in a wee bit.
I just wanted to quickly say before I go, I have to go now, but thanks for everybody for listening. And I just wanted to say that if anybody wants to contact me afterwards or has any comments or questions on anything that I was rambling on about, then they're very welcome to contact me, and the BSG committee people will be able to put you in contact. Great. Thanks very much, guys.
Good luck with your submission.
Thank you. I'll go back to work.
Yeah.
Finishing the discussion. I'm trying to